Autoscaling is a feature in Kasm Workspaces that allow admins to automatically provision new agents or destroy existing agents based on the usage needs. Kasm supports autoscaling for multiple VM providers like Google Cloud, AWS, Azure, DigitalOcean, and OCI. In this video, we'll show you how to configure autoscaling in Kasm Workspaces with AWS. In this deployment, I have a zone set up already. Let me show you how it's configured. I set the allow origin domain to the request host parameter that dynamically extracts the host value from the incoming request. The upstream auth address needs to be set to the URL of the deployment where requests to the Kasm sessions can be authenticated against. This can also be set to the URL of your load balancer if you have one in place for that zone. Similarly, the proxy hostname must be set to the URL of the deployment through which you want to proxy the connections. Next, we need to configure the pools. I will add a new pool here and call it Docker Pool Walkthrough and set the type as Docker Agent. Once the pool is set up, you can click Edit, and then at the top, click Autoscale Configuration, then click Add to add the new config. Give it a name, enable it, and select the appropriate deployment zone. For standby cores, specify the number of cores you want to remain available at all times. If the number of actual cores goes below this number, Kasm will provision new agents. If the number of cores rise above this number, Kasm will destroy existing autoscaled agents. I'll set this to 8 cores. Standby GPUs and standby memory have the same concept, so I will set them to 0 and 8000 respectively. Do note that standby memory takes values in megabytes and not gigabytes. Downscale backoff is the time in seconds that Kasm will wait before downscaling the resources in scenarios where there is lower usage than the set standby values. I'll set it to 3600 seconds. The agent override settings allow you to define the compute resources that you want Kasm to use on your autoscaled agents. I'll set the agent cores override to 16, agent GPUs override to 0, and agent memory override to 24. Next comes the Nginx cert. You don't need to configure this unless your users are directly connecting with the agents. In that case, you need to configure your cert and private key here so that the SSL can be installed on your agents. If your deployment is sitting behind a load balancer or a proxy, it is not necessary to fill this. However, this is a required field in Kasm, so I'll just give an empty space for both the Nginx key and the Nginx cert. Click Next and you'll be prompted to enter the VM provider details. I'll set the provider as AWS because that's what we're going to use in this video. Give your VM provider a config name. And now we need to get some values from the AWS dashboard and put them here so that Kasm can send requests to AWS on your behalf to be able to create and destroy compute resources. Here's the AWS dashboard. Go to the IAM roles, then create a new user called Kasm Autoscale User for the purposes of autoscaling. You can attach this new user to the group so that the user will be associated with all policies of that group. Let me go ahead and create the new group for this demonstration. I'll name it as Kasm Autoscale Group and add Kasm Autoscale User to this group. I'll now add a policy to this group, so I'll go to the policies and click Create Policy. I'll edit this policy by clicking on the JSON and I'll paste the policy config that I already have with me from another deployment. There are a couple things that I need to modify in this policy. The first thing is the regions are set to EU Central 1, but you can modify this value and set it to the region where you want your users to be deployed. If you click on this drop-down in the top bar, you can see the different regions available in AWS and their corresponding names. So you can choose whichever regions you want to use for your deployment from this list. The next thing to change is the account ID, which is right next to the region name in the config. You can find your account ID by clicking on this drop-down menu. Just copy it from here and make sure your policy has your correct account ID, because obviously it's different for everyone. The same applies for the KMS key. If you are using KMS keys for your deployment, make sure you put the correct region, account ID, and also the correct path to your key. Next comes the IAM pass role. This is from another deployment and we don't need it here, so I'll just remove it. I'll name the policy as Deployment Autoscale Policy and then click Create Policy. Browse back to Groups, go to Kasm Autoscale Group, then go to Permissions, and I'll attach the newly created policy to this group. Now that the policy is attached to the group, I'll go to Security Credentials, scroll down, and as you can see, currently we don't have any access keys. So I'll click Create Access Key. From the list of use cases, I'll choose Other and click Next, and then click Create Access Key. This will create the access key and the secret. I will copy both values to my notepad for reference for Kasm later. One thing to note here is that most organizations set the access keys to automatically expire after a certain period of time. So when they expire, you need to create new credentials and update them in Kasm because Kasm cannot do this automatically for you. The next step is the AMI catalog. You can search for it using the search bar if you don't know where to find it. You can see a list of all available images in AWS. I'll be using the Ubuntu 22.04 image. On the right side, choose the architecture you want to use, and depending upon whether you select x86 or ARM, the AMI value will change, so make sure you select the right architecture that you want to use for your deployment. Also, make sure your region on the top is set to the correct region you want to use because changing the region will also change the AMI value. I'll copy the AMI value to my notepad so I can reference it later with Kasm. For the EC2 instance types, browse to Instant Types in AWS. Here you can find all the different types of instances available in AWS. I'll select T2 Medium, which has 2 cores and 4 gigs of memory. AWS Max EC2 nodes refers to the maximum number of compute instances that can be spun up by Kasm. I'll set it to 15, which means Kasm will not provision any more than 15 agents. Next up is the network security groups. You can attach multiple network security groups to your deployments. To find your security groups in AWS dashboard, you can go to the VPC, then under Security, click on Security Groups. You can either use an existing group or create a new one here. I'll use an existing security group for my existing deployment. Simply copy the security group ID. Next, we need to assign a subnet to our auto-scaled agents. To do this, you can once again go to VPC, then Subnets. You can create a new subnet or use an existing one from your deployment. I'll use one that already exists in my deployment. All the agents provisioned by Kasm in the future will be part of this subnet. You can then choose the EBS volume size you want to allocate to your agents. I'll set it to 150 gigabytes. For the EBS volume type, I'll set it to GP2. You can also set this to GP3 if you want to use that instead. It's completely up to you what you want to use for your environment. If you want to associate an IAM role to your instance, you can configure it in the EC2 IAM field. For this demo, I'm not going to be using an IAM role. Since this is a required field, I'll just input an empty space into the text box. You can also assign custom tags to your instances by filling out this field. I'm not going to be using that for this demo, so I will skip it. You also need a startup script so that when the instance is provisioned, the startup script can install the Kasm agent role and configure the other required settings. You can find the startup script on our GitHub repo named Workspace Autoscale Startup Scripts. Since I'm using version 1.15, I'll select the same here, and then go to the Docker agents and select ubuntu.sh. I'll copy this script into my notepad, and there are some modifications that need to be done. First, make sure the IP grabbing logic in the script is appropriate to the cloud you're using, which is in this case AWS. Also, since I'm not using SSL certs for my agents, I'll comment out these lines that are responsible for configuring the SSL certs on the instance. At this point, we've completed all the settings that need to be configured in AWS. I'll now copy the values from my notepad to complete the Kasm installation. Additionally, you can add an AWS config override, depending upon your use cases. In this demo, we will not be using one. If you want to be able to SSH into your deployed instances, you can input your SSH private key here in RSA PEM format. Click on Finish, and we now have an Autoscale configuration in the pool. If you go to the AWS Instances page, you can see that Kasm has provisioned a new instance, and the same can be verified if I go to my Kasm admin dashboard and then Docker agents. As you can see, a new agent was provisioned by Kasm, and it takes a little while for the agent to check in. Once the agent is checked in, You will see that the host name changes from null to the actual internal IP of the agent. To cross-verify that we are able to deploy sessions on this newly created agent, let's log into the Kasm Workspaces console and clone the Chrome workspace. I'll scroll down and enable Restrict Image to Kasm Agent, and then select the agent that is deployed through the Autoscale config. I'll now wait for the image to be downloaded on the new agent, and once that is done, I can launch the session. And with that, our AWS Autoscale setup is complete. Thanks for watching the video. All the resources used in this demonstration will be linked in the description. See you next time.